The room is dark. The candle flickers. Outside, someone is banging pots and pans, whooping like animals, firing guns into the night sky. Your new husband sits on the edge of the bed, his back to you, hands trembling slightly as he removes his boots. You're 16 years old. You've never been alone with a man in your life. Your mother told you nothing except to be obedient. The noise outside grows louder. They're coming for him, the men from town, to drag him away as part of some tradition you don't understand. And when they're done with that, when he finally returns hours from now, drunk and exhausted, you'll be expected to know what comes next. Except you don't. No one told you. And tomorrow morning, you'll wake up before dawn to haul water, cook breakfast, and begin the same back-breaking work that will fill every single day for the rest of your life. If you survive. This is the wedding night for a frontier woman in the Wild West. Not the romantic dream, not the gentle beginning, just fear, confusion, and the crushing weight of a life you didn't fully understand until it was too late to turn back. Tonight, we're going to talk about the real experiences of women in the American West during the 1800s, the parts that don't make it into movies, the truth about marriage, childbirth, daily survival, and the brutal costs of building a life on the frontier. If you're still awake at the end, I'd appreciate a like and a subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy this kind of content. Now settle in, get comfortable, and let's drift back to a time when being a woman meant facing death and hardship with every passing season. It starts before you ever reach the West. It starts in a cramped parlor back east, or a farm in Missouri, or a tenement in New York City. It starts with a decision, or sometimes just desperation dressed up as a decision. You're leaving. Everything you've ever known, everyone you've ever loved. You're going west because your husband wants land, or because you're a widow with no options, or because you answered an advertisement in a newspaper from a man you've never met who promises you a better life. Maybe you believe him. Maybe you just need to believe in something. The preparation alone is exhausting. You spend weeks, sometimes months, sewing a canvas wagon cover with other women in town. It's a social event, sure, but your fingers bleed. From the thick needle and rough fabric, you're making something that needs to withstand rain, wind, sun, and the occasional spark from a campfire. You sew extra clothes because you won't be able to make new ones for months, maybe years. You calculate. Wait obsessively because every pound matters when oxen are pulling your entire life across 2,000 miles of nothing. And then comes the cruelest part, choosing what to leave behind. Your grandmother's china, the rocking chair your father made. Books, because books are heavy and reading is a luxury you might not have time for anymore. You stand in your childhood, bedroom for the last time, running your hands over the quilt your mother stitched, knowing you can't take it, knowing you might never come back, knowing your mother might die before you see her again, and she probably knows it too. That's why she's crying when she hugs you goodbye, not because she's sad, because she's terrified. The wagon train gathers. At dawn, dozens of families, all heading west with the same desperate hope. The men are excited, talking about land and opportunity. The women are quieter. They know what's coming. Months of travel through terrain that wants to kill you. Cholera, dysentery, snake bites, drowning at river crossings, childbirth in a wagon, while it's still moving because the train can't afford to stop. They've heard the stories. They've seen the graves along the trail from previous years. Small wooden crosses marking where someone's dream ended in dirt. The journey is worse than you imagined. You wake before sunrise every day to cook breakfast over an open fire, then pack everything into the wagon before the train moves. You walk. Most women walk beside the wagon to save weight for supplies. You walk 15 miles, 20 miles a day, through dust so thick you can't breathe, through mud that sucks your boots off, through heat that makes the horizon shimmer like water that isn't there. Your feet blister, your skin burns, your lips crack and bleed. There's no privacy, none. You relieve yourself behind a wagon wheel or a scraggly bush, always aware that 30 other families can see you. You wash, when you wash at all, with a rag and a cup of water that has to last for drinking too. Your monthly cycle happens in a wagon full of your family's belongings, and you make do with rags you wash in secret and hope dry before anyone notices. You sleep on the ground or in the wagon bed, pressed against your husband and children, listening to the sounds of other families doing the same thing 20 feet away, snoring, crying, arguing, sometimes worse. The gender ratio becomes obvious even before you arrive. At every fort, every trading post, every river crossing, you see them. Men, hundreds of men, miners, trappers, soldiers, drifters. They stare, not always with kindness. You learn to keep your eyes down, stay close to your husband or father, never wander away from the group. Because out here, there are no show-offs, no laws that matter, no protection except what you can provide yourself. And you're one woman among hundreds of men who haven't seen a woman in months. When you finally reach your destination, you realize the West is not what you imagined. There are no neat little towns with white churches and tidy homes. There are canvas tents, muddy streets, wooden shacks that leak when it rains. And if you're homesteading, there's nothing at all. Just land. Endless, empty, overwhelming land that you're supposed to turn into a farm with nothing but your hands, an axe, and a prayer. The first winter is always the worst. You're living in a dugout carved into a hillside, or a sod house with walls made of stacked dirt bricks. The roof drips when it rains. Snakes fall from the ceiling. Mice nest in the corners. The wind howls through gaps in the walls, and no matter how much you stuff them with rags, you can never get warm. You cook, sleep, and live in a space the size of a modern bedroom, shared with your husband, your children if you have any, and sometimes other family members who came west with you. The smell is permanent. Smoke, sweat, dirt, animals. You stop noticing after a while. But before all of that, before the hard work and the isolation and the desperate daily survival, there's something else. Something you've been dreading since you left home. Courtship, marriage, the wedding night. If you're lucky, you knew your husband before heading west. If you're not, you're meeting him for the first time at a train station in Kansas or a mining camp in Montana, trying to reconcile the man in front of you with the letters he sent. He's shorter than you thought, older, rougher. He smells like tobacco and sweat and something else you can't identify. But you're here now, and your money's gone, and turning back isn't an option. Say you smile. You take his hand. You pretend this is what you wanted. Mail-order brides were shockingly common in the Old West. The term makes it sound transactional, and honestly, it was. Men would place advertisements in Eastern newspapers describing themselves and what they were looking for in a wife. Hard-working. Miner seeks respectable woman for marriage. Must be willing to relocate to Colorado. No drinkers. Women would respond, and after a few letters, maybe a photograph, they'd agree to marry. Sometimes they'd meet once before the wedding. Sometimes they'd marry the day the woman arrived. It wasn't just poor women doing this. School teachers, shop girls, daughters of respectable families. They all answered these ads because the East offered them almost nothing. If you were unmarried at 22, you were approaching old age in the marriage market. If you were widowed with children, your prospects were grim. The West offered a chance, however risky, and the risk was substantial. Marriage brokers made fortunes facilitating these arrangements. They took fees from both parties, promised full disclosure of backgrounds and intentions, and delivered results. By 1905, successful brokers were arranging 2,500 marriages a year. That's nearly 7 marriages every single day. The average price for their services was 2.5% of the husband's total net worth, plus a fee from the woman. They investigated backgrounds, verified employment, checked for existing wives. When they did their job well, it worked. When they didn't, women found themselves married to drunks, abusers, or men who'd lied about everything from their age to their finances. But even if you knew your husband, even if you'd courted him properly back east, the wedding itself was different on the frontier. There might not be a church. There might not be a preacher. You might get married by a justice of the peace in a tent, or by a circuit preacher who only comes through town once every few months. Or you might not get married officially at all. Common law marriage was widely practiced in the West, partly because of the lack of religious officials, partly because people were practical. If you lived together, worked together, and presented yourselves as married, you were married. The law usually recognized it eventually. Wedding ceremonies were brief, practical affairs. You wore your best dress, which might just be your only clean dress. Your husband wore his Sunday clothes, if he had them. Friends and neighbors crowded into whatever space was available, a homestead cabin, a saloon, someone's sod house. The ceremony lasted minutes. Then came the celebration, which lasted as long as the whiskey held out. And that's when things got strange. The shivaree. Different names for the same tradition, imported from Europe and adapted to frontier life in ways that were equal parts celebration and torture. After the wedding, after the ceremony, after you'd retired to your cabin or tent or corner of someone else's house, the community would gather outside. They'd bang pots and pans, play instruments badly and loudly, fire guns into the air, shout and whoop and make an ungodly racket specifically designed to prevent the newly married couple from having their wedding night. But it got worse. They'd demand entrance to the home. They'd pound on the door until it opened. Then they'd kidnap the groom. Sometimes they'd tie him to a tree. Sometimes they'd take him to the saloon and force him to buy drinks for everyone. Sometimes they'd just ride him around town on a rail, laughing the whole time. The bride was expected to wait, alone, in a state of anxiety that bordered on terror, because she had no idea when or if her husband would come back, or what condition he'd be in when he did. Historians debate how good-natured this tradition really was. It was called community spirit, a way to welcome a couple into social life. A harmless prank. But if you were the 16-year-old bride sitting alone in the dark, while drunk men fired guns outside and dragged your husband away, it didn't feel harmless. It felt like the world was telling you that your wedding night, your first intimate moment with your husband, was public property, entertainment, something the community had a right to disrupt. And when the shivaree finally ended, when the crowd dispersed and your husband stumbled home hours later, exhausted, drunk, possibly injured from whatever hazing he'd endured, you still didn't get peace. You got expectation. Here's what, almost, no one talks about. Victorian-era women were kept deliberately ignorant about sex. Good, respectable women weren't told anything. Their mothers might whisper vague instructions about duty and obedience, but specifics were considered too vulgar to discuss. Many women arrived on their wedding night with absolutely no understanding of what was about to happen. They didn't know the mechanics. They didn't know it would hurt. They didn't know how their own bodies worked, let alone their husbands'. Medical guides from the era are staggering in their cruelty. Women were told to remain passive, to endure that any pleasure they felt was sinful, that pregnancy was a punishment from God for Eve's transgression, and they should bear it with Christian fortitude. They were told their husband had rights over their bodies, and refusing him was grounds for divorce or violence. They were told that thinking strange thoughts during pregnancy could deform the baby, that masturbation caused insanity, that menstruation was a disease requiring bed rest and isolation. So imagine you're that bride. You're 16 or 18 or 22. You've been traveling for months, wearing the same clothes, sleeping on the ground, too exhausted for anything but survival. Your husband is a near stranger, or maybe someone you've known your whole life but never been alone with. You're in a one-room cabin with walls so thin you can hear the neighbors breathing. There's no door, just a blanket hung over the entrance. No lock, no privacy. And you're expected to know what to do. The physical pain was real and documented. Without proper knowledge or preparation, without lubrication or gentleness, first sexual experiences were often traumatic. Women bled, they tore, they cried. And the next morning, they woke up and cooked breakfast and pretended nothing had happened, because admitting pain or fear would make them seem weak or frigid or hysterical. Some women were fortunate. They married kind men who took time, who were patient, who'd somehow learned that a wife wasn't just a vessel for their needs. These marriages grew into partnerships, but plenty of women weren't fortunate. They married men who saw them as property, who took what they wanted without asking, who came to bed drunk and angry. And on the frontier, there was nowhere to go. No mother to run home to, no friend who could help. Just you, your husband, and miles of empty land. Pregnancy fear started immediately. Without reliable birth control, without any understanding of fertility cycles, every sexual encounter carried the risk of pregnancy. And pregnancy on the frontier was a potential death sentence. But before we get to that horror, let's talk about what came next. The morning after the wedding, the beginning of your real life as a frontier wife. You wake before dawn, always before dawn. The fire's gone out overnight, and the cabin is freezing. Your breath fogs in the air. Your body aches from yesterday. From the journey, from sleeping on a thin mattress stuffed with corn husks that poke through the fabric. Your husband is already up, or he should be, pulling on his boots and heading out to tend to livestock or start the day's work. And you have your own endless list of tasks that will consume every waking hour until you collapse at night. First, the fire. You coax embers back to life with kindling, blow until your lungs burn, add larger pieces of wood once the flames catch. This fire is everything. It heats the cabin, cooks the food, boils water for washing and drinking. It can never go out. Women have frozen to death because the fire went out and they couldn't restart it in time. You feed the fire the way. You'll feed your children someday, constantly, carefully, with an awareness that your family's survival depends on it. Water next. If you're lucky, there's a well. If you're not, there's a stream or river, which means walking, sometimes half a mile or more, with heavy buckets. You make this trip multiple times a day. Water for cooking, drinking, washing clothes, washing bodies. Except you rarely have enough for all of those things, so you make choices. Drinking first, cooking second, washing last and least. The smell of unwashed bodies becomes normal. You stop noticing it on yourself, but you notice it on everyone else. Breakfast has to be made. Biscuits if you have flour. Cornmeal mush if you don't. Salt pork or bacon if you're not saving it. Coffee made from grounds you've already used twice before. You cook over an open hearth or a cast-iron stove, if you're fortunate enough to have one. The heat is brutal in summer. Your face burns, your hands blister, but you cook anyway because not cooking means not eating, and not eating means not surviving. Your husband eats first. He gets the largest portion, the best cuts, the only chair at the table if there is a table. It's not cruelty, necessarily. It's practicality. He's doing the heavy physical labor plowing, building, hunting. He needs the calories. You eat what's left, standing up, often while serving him or cleaning or preparing the next thing. Your children, if you have them, eat after him too. You come last, always last. Then the real work begins. Laundry might be the worst chore. People today have no concept. None. You heat water over the fire in a large kettle, which takes hours. You scrub clothes against a washboard, a ridged piece of metal or wood that destroys your knuckles. You use lye soap that burns your skin. Every piece of clothing has to be washed individually, scrubbed until your arms shake, then rinsed, wrung out, and hung to dry. A family's worth of laundry could take an entire day. Some women only did laundry once a month because they literally couldn't afford the time more often. Sewing is constant. Everything has to be made by hand. Clothes, blankets, quilts, towels. Buttons are reattached. Holes are patched. Worn fabric is cut down and repurposed until there's nothing left but scraps, which are then sewn into quilts. Your hands are never still. You sew by candlelight at night, squinting until your eyes burn. Because if your husband's work pants develop a tear and you don't fix them, he can't work. And if he can't work, you can't eat. Making soap is a full-day event. You save fat from butchered animals for months. Then you mix it with lye, which you've made from wood ash, in precise proportions that can burn your skin off if you get it wrong. You stir the mixture for hours until it thickens. Pour it into molds, let it cure for weeks. The smell is nauseating. The process is dangerous. But soap is essential, and buying it is an expense you can't afford. Candles require the same process. Save fat, render it, Dip wicks repeatedly until layers of tallow build up. You need dozens of candles to get through winter. They provide light, but they also drip, smoke, and smell like burning animal. They're a luxury you make yourself because darkness falls early and you have work to do. Gardening is survival. You plant a vegetable garden as soon as the ground thaws, tending it obsessively because this garden might be the difference between life and death next winter. You pull weeds, chase away rabbits, pray for rain but not too much. Harvest everything at the right time, which is usually all at once, meaning weeks of canning, pickling, and preserving. You put food in jars using methods passed down from your mother. You store root vegetables in a cellar. You dry beans and corn. You make sauerkraut and pickles and anything else that will last through months of cold. And through all of this, you're managing a home that's barely a home. The sod house you live in has dirt walls that shed constantly, covering every surface with fine brown dust. You sweep multiple times a day and it makes no difference. The roof is sod too, which means it leaks when it rains, and then you have mud dripping onto your clean floors and your bed and your food. Snakes live in the roof. You've learned to recognize the sound of them slithering above you at night. Mice nests in the walls. Insects are everywhere. You fight an endless, losing battle against the dirt and the creatures and the encroaching wilderness that wants to reclaim the space you've carved out. Isolation gnaws at you. Your nearest neighbor might be 3 miles away. You might not see another woman for weeks. There are no shopping trips, no social calls, no casual conversations. Just you, your husband, your work, and silence. The silence becomes oppressive. You talk to yourself. You talk to chickens. You sing while you work, not because you're happy, but because you need to hear a voice. Some women broke. It was called prairie madness, a term that sounds poetic until you understand what it meant. Women standing at the horizon, staring for hours. Women talking to people who weren't there. Women who walked into the prairie one day and never came back. The isolation, the endless work, the lack of anything resembling the social world they'd left behind. It fractured something inside them. But you can't afford to break. You have too much to do. Because all of this work and exhaustion and isolation is just your daily life. The baseline, the best case scenario, and then you get pregnant. The first sign is missing your monthly bleeding. You wait, hoping it's just stress or poor nutrition or the hard physical work. But deep down, you know. You've seen it in other women. You've heard the whispers. You're pregnant, and everything changes. The statistics are simple and brutal. In the 1850s, the average American woman had 6 children. If she lived in the East, if she had access to doctors and midwives and family support, her chances of dying in childbirth ran as high as 1 in 8. On the frontier, it was worse. 3 times worse than in New England. More than 50 times. Worse than it is today. Pregnancy and childbirth were leading killers of women in their reproductive years. So when you realize you're pregnant, you write your will. This wasn't unusual. It was standard practice. Women wrote wills when they discovered pregnancy because they understood the very real possibility they wouldn't survive. They wrote letters to their children to be opened after their death. They made arrangements for who would care for their babies. They said goodbye to their husbands in ways that make your heart crack if you read them now. If I do not survive this, know that I loved you Please tell our daughter about me so she remembers. You don't tell anyone at first. There's superstition around early pregnancy. Bad luck to announce it before it shows. But also, practically, you can't afford to be treated as an invalid. You have work to do, so you'll continue hauling water, scrubbing, laundry, tending the garden, cooking over a hot fire. You do all of it with a growing weight in your belly and a growing fear in your chest. There's no prenatal care, no vitamins, no ultrasounds or blood tests. You have no idea if the baby is healthy, no idea if it's positioned right. No idea if you have high blood pressure or gestational diabetes or any of the other conditions that kill women during pregnancy. You just continue with your daily work and hope your body knows what it's doing. Morning sickness is something you handle alone. You throw up in a bucket or out the door, wipe your mouth, and keep cooking breakfast. Your husband might notice you're pale, might ask if you're all right. You say yes because what else can you say? You certainly can't rest. There's too much to do. As the pregnancy progresses, the physical burden becomes overwhelming. You're still hauling water, still scrubbing clothes, still working in the garden. Your back aches constantly. Your feet swell. You can't breathe properly because the baby is pushing on your lungs. You develop heartburn so severe you can't sleep lying down. You sleep sitting up in a chair, or you don't sleep at all. Other women, if they're nearby, offer advice. Old wives' tales mix with genuine folk wisdom. Eat this herb to prevent miscarriage. Avoid that food or your baby will have a birthmark. Don't raise your arms above your head or the umbilical cord will strangle the baby. Don't look at anything ugly or your baby will be ugly. Don't think frightening thoughts or you'll give birth to a monster. It's all nonsense, but it's also the only guidance you have. Miscarriage is common and devastating. Maybe 1 in 4 pregnancies end in miscarriage, though numbers are hard to track because women handled it privately. You might wake up bleeding, cramping, knowing something's wrong. There's no hospital to go to, no emergency room. You either miscarry at home, dealing with the blood and pain and loss alone, or if you're lucky, another woman comes to help. You bury the tiny body behind the house. You mourn. Then you get back to work because the work doesn't stop for grief. Some women tried to prevent pregnancy altogether. Birth control methods existed, but they ranged from ineffective to deadly. Douching with various Salesians vinegar, boric acid, even lye was common but unreliable and often caused infections. Herbal remedies like tansy, pennyroyal, and black cohosh were used as abortifacients, but they were also poisonous. Women died from overdoses. Female pills and prevention powders were sold through mail-order catalogs with cryptic descriptions, most containing dangerous chemicals. Some women attempted to induce abortion through physical trauma, flowing downstairs, tight corsets, abdominal massage. Desperation made women try things that could kill them. Condoms existed but were expensive, uncomfortable, and socially taboo. They were made from sheep intestines or vulcanized rubber and required cooperation from men who often refused to use them. The withdrawal method was unreliable. The rhythm method was unknown because no one understood fertility cycles. Basically, if you were sexually active with your husband, which you were required to be, pregnancy was almost inevitable. Abortion was illegal, dangerous, and more common than anyone admitted. Bacali procedures performed by unlicensed practitioners with unsterilized instruments killed thousands of women annually. infection, hemorrhage, perforated uteruses. Women who survived often couldn't have children afterward, which in that society marked them as failures. And if they were caught, they faced legal prosecution and social ostracism. So most women didn't try to prevent pregnancy. They accepted it, and they feared it. As your due date approaches, you try to prepare. You gather clean clothes, though clean is relative. You boil water. You ask another woman to be present, if there is another woman. You hope the midwife will make it in time. Midwives were lifesavers, literally. They traveled long distances, often on horseback, arriving dirty and exhausted but experienced. They knew techniques passed down through generations, how to turn a breech baby, how to handle hemorrhage, when to cut the cord. They weren't trained in any formal sense, but they had knowledge that doctors often lacked. But midwives weren't always available. Some areas had none. Some women gave birth attended only by their husbands, who had no idea what to do. Some gave birth completely alone. There are documented cases of women giving birth in wagons while the wagon train kept moving, because stopping would delay everyone. Women giving birth in fields while their husbands continued plowing. Women giving birth in sod houses during blizzards with no one to help them. The pain starts slowly, contractions that feel like bad cramps. You keep working because you don't know how long this will take. Maybe you're making dinner when your water breaks, soaking your skirt in the floor. You clean it up. You keep cooking. The contractions get stronger, closer together. You finally stop working and focus on the monumental task ahead. Labor in the 1800s had no pain relief, no epidurals, no medications, just pain. Unrelenting, overwhelming pain that could last hours or days. Women were advised to arm themselves with patience and prayer. They were told to restrain their screams so as not to frighten their family. They bit down on leather straps or wooden spoons. They gripped the hands of whoever was present until their fingers went white. The pain is beyond description. Contractions come in waves, each one more intense than the last, building to a crescendo that makes you certain you're dying. Your body is being torn apart from the inside. You can feel the baby moving down, feel your pelvis separating, feel everything stretching and tearing. You scream despite your best efforts. You pray. You beg for it to end. And then complications happen. Maybe the baby is breech feet or buttocks first instead of head first. The midwife tries to turn it manually, reaching inside you with unwashed hands, pushing and manipulating while you scream. Sometimes it works. Sometimes it doesn't. Breech births are dangerous for both mother and child. The baby can get stuck. Oxygen supply can be cut off. Without modern medical intervention, breech presentations often end in death. Maybe the placenta is covering the cervix, a condition called placenta previa. When labor begins, you hemorrhage. Blood everywhere. So much blood that the midwife can't stop it. You're bleeding out while trying to give birth, and there's nothing anyone can do. You might survive if the baby comes quickly. If not, you die on your bed, in your home, surrounded by people who love you but can't save you. Maybe your pelvis is too narrow. Maybe the baby is too large. The baby gets stuck. Hours pass. Days sometimes. The baby dies inside you. Then you develop infection, fever, delirium. This is called obstructed labor, and it's agonizing. The only solution in that era was forceps, brutal metal instruments that looked like tongs. Doctors or midwives would reach inside and pull the baby out, often crushing its skull in the process. If you were lucky, the forceps delivered a dead baby and you lived. If you weren't lucky, the forceps tore your insides and you died from infection days later. Emergency cesarean sections existed, but were almost always fatal. 3 out of 4 women died from the procedure. It was performed as a last resort, usually when the mother was already dying. The most famous successful frontier cesarean was performed in 1827 in Ohio by a doctor named John Richmond. He did it by candlelight in a farmhouse, using whatever instruments he had. The woman survived. It was considered a miracle. Infection was the biggest killer. Puerperal fever, childbed fever, sepsis. Doctors and midwives didn't understand germ theory yet. They didn't wash their hands. They used the same tools on multiple women without sterilizing them. They went from handling dead bodies to delivering babies. Bacteria entered through the birth canal or through tears and lacerations. Within days of giving birth, you'd develop fever. Your abdomen would become painful and distended. Delirium would set in, and then you'd die, slowly, painfully, while your newborn baby cried in the next room. Even if everything went well, even if you delivered a healthy baby without complications, you weren't safe. Postpartum hemorrhage could happen hours after birth. Your uterus fails to contract properly, blood pours out, and you bleed to death before anyone can stop it. Or you develop blood clots that travel to your lungs or brain, or retained placenta. Causes infection. The days and weeks after birth were almost as dangerous as birth itself. And if you survived, you were expected to recover quickly. Eastern women from wealthy families could spend 3 to 4 weeks in bed, convalescing. Frontier women didn't have that luxury. You were expected back to work within days. Sometimes hours. You'd cook dinner the day after giving birth, do laundry 2 days later, work in the garden by the end of the week. Your body hadn't healed. You were torn, bleeding, exhausted. But the work didn't stop for childbirth. Infant mortality was staggering. In some frontier communities, 1 in 3 babies died before their first birthday, stillbirth, birth defects, infection, disease, accidents, parents, buried children with regularity that seems unthinkable now. Small graves behind the house, tiny wooden crosses, names and dates carved with shaking hands. Some families lost multiple children. Some women gave birth to 8 children and raised 3. The psychological toll is hard to measure. How do you process giving birth in terror, knowing you might die, then doing it again and again because you have no choice? How do you recover from losing a baby, then getting pregnant again months later? How do you keep going when your body is broken and your heart is shattered? You keep going because you have to, because there's no alternative, because survival means pushing through trauma and grief and pain until they become background noise. But the hardships didn't end with childbirth. Daily life on the frontier was relentlessly dangerous in ways that had nothing to do with pregnancy. Disease was everywhere. Malaria ravaged settlements across the Midwest. In gold camps, cholera killed people within hours. Typhoid, yellow fever, smallpox, scarlet fever, diphtheria, tuberculosis, influenza, These diseases swept through communities, killing indiscriminately. Entire families wiped out in weeks. Children, especially vulnerable, dying in numbers that would be considered a catastrophe today. There were no vaccines, no antibiotics, no understanding of how disease spread. People thought bad air caused illness. They didn't know about bacteria or viruses. So when cholera struck, they'd blame the water supply, which was sometimes correct, but they didn't know. Why? When someone developed tuberculosis, they'd send them to a different climate, hoping fresh air would cure them. It didn't. Home remedies were all you had. Poultices made from herbs, teas brewed from tree bark. Native American plant knowledge, when you could access it, was often more effective than anything white doctors prescribed. Willow bark for pain, sage for fever, echinacea for infection. These treatments sometimes helped. Sometimes they did nothing. Sometimes they made things worse. Patent medicines were a plague of their own. Mail-order catalogs sold miracle cures for everything from consumption to cancer. Most contained alcohol, cocaine, opium, or mercury. Soothing syrups for babies were often opium-based, addicting infants and sometimes killing them. Female tonics contained alcohol concentrations of 50% or more, making them essentially whiskey marketed to women. Pain relievers were cocaine in liquid form. People became addicted without understanding why. Families spent their meager savings on these medicines, hoping for relief, getting addiction instead. Doctors, when available, were often worse than no doctors at all. Medical education in the 1800s was minimal. Many doctors trained through apprenticeships, watching another doctor work for a few years before setting up their own practice. Medical schools existed, but they taught outdated theories and dangerous practices. Bloodletting was still common. Leeches, purging, blistering. These treatments weakened already sick patients, often killing them. Surgery was a nightmare. No anesthesia until late in the century. Patients were held down while surgeons cut into them. Screaming was expected. Shock was common. Post-operative infection was almost guaranteed because sterilization wasn't practiced. Surgical instruments were wiped off between patients, maybe rinsed in water, but never properly cleaned. The same scalpel that cut into a patient with gangrene would be used on the next patient. Spreading infection, dental care was non-existent or barbaric. Toothaches were common. When a tooth became infected, it had to be pulled, without anesthesia, using pliers or forceps. Sometimes the tooth broke during extraction, leaving fragments that caused more infection. People lost teeth young, leading to malnutrition and further health problems. Some people pulled their own teeth using string and doorknobs. Others lived with chronic pain until the tooth abscess became septic and killed them. Accidents were common and often fatal. Farm equipment maimed people regularly. Plows, threshers, combines, all dangerous machinery operated by exhausted people. Fingers crushed, arms caught in mechanisms, people dragged under wagon wheels. Without emergency medicine, minor injuries became major. A cut that today would require a few stitches could turn gangrenous and kill you. Fire was a constant threat. Cooking over open flames, heating with wood stoves, lighting with candles. One spark could burn down your entire home. Women's long skirts caught fire while cooking, engulfing them in flames. Children fell into fireplaces. Cabins burned to the ground in minutes, killing everyone inside. Wild animals posed real danger. Bears, mountain lions, wolves, venomous snakes. Women working alone in fields or gardens could be attacked. Livestock were killed by predators, sometimes, with the farmer trying to defend them and getting injured or killed in the process. Even domestic animals were dangerous. Horses kicked, cows trampled, bulls gored. Weather could kill you. Blizzards that trapped families in their homes for weeks, slowly freezing and starving. Tornadoes that destroyed everything in minutes. Lightning. Strikes. Flash floods. Drought that lasted years, turning farmland to dust, starving entire regions. Heat waves that killed the old, young, and weak. The prairie sun could give you heat stroke. The mountain snow could give you frostbite. Nature was indifferent to your survival. And then there was human violence. Domestic violence was endemic and unpunished. A man could beat his wife with little to no legal consequence. Law enforcement was sparse. In many areas, there was no sheriff, no judge, no legal system at all. Women endured abuse because leaving meant destitution and death. Where would you go? How would you survive alone? You stayed. You endured. You hoped he'd stop. Alcoholism was epidemic, especially among men who'd served in the Civil War. They came home traumatized, addicted to alcohol or opiates, unable to adjust to civilian life. They drank to forget. They drank because they had PTSD before anyone knew what that was. They drank because whiskey was cheap and everywhere. And when they drank, they became violent. Women and children bore the brunt of this violence. Beatings, rape, psychological abuse. No shelters, no social services, no escape. Sexual assault was more common than recorded because women rarely reported it. Reporting meant admitting what happened, which brought shame. Trials were rare, convictions rarer. Rape was seen as a woman's failure to protect her virtue, not a man's crime. So women stayed silent. They dealt with trauma alone. They became pregnant from rape and either had the baby or attempted dangerous abortions. Their attackers faced no consequences. In boomtowns and mining camps, prostitution was rampant. Some women chose sex work as the only available income. Others were trafficked, forced into it through debt or kidnapping. Brothels operated openly, with little interference from authorities. Women in these professions faced violence regularly. Beatings from clients, murder, disease, drug addiction. Short, brutal lives ending in unmarked graves. Law enforcement, when it existed, was inconsistent and often corrupt. Vigilante justice was common. Mobs would lynch suspected criminals without trial. Women accused of adultery or murder could be run out of town or worse. The legal system offered little protection to anyone, but especially not to women. And despite all of this, despite the disease and violence and constant danger, women found ways to survive, to thrive even. The West offered freedoms unthinkable in the East. Women could own property in their own names. Under Spanish-Mexican law, married. Women retained control of their land, a right that carried over after US annexation and benefited white women too. Women homesteaded alone, claimed their 160 acres, built their farms. They owned businesses, saloons, boarding houses, laundries, bakeries. They ran them successfully, earning respect and profit. Voting rights came early to Western territories. Wyoming granted women suffrage in 1869, hoping to attract more women to settle. Utah followed in 1870, Colorado in 1893, Idaho in 1896. These territories recognized that women's contributions to frontier life were essential and deserved recognition. Women voted in local elections, ran for office, served on school boards. Not all Western states were progressive. Many denied women rights. But enough were that the West became a proving ground for suffrage. Gender norms were more fluid on the frontier. Need mattered more than propriety. Women wore men's clothing for practical work. They rode astride instead of side saddle. They learned to shoot, to handle weapons, to defend themselves and their homes. Calamity Jane dressed like a man, drank like a man, rode like a man, and became famous for it. Annie Oakley became one of the greatest sharpshooters in history, performing in Buffalo Bill's Wild West show. These women weren't outliers. They represented possibilities. Some women embraced lives of adventure. Polka Alice Ivers ran gambling halls. Bellstar was an outlaw. Pearl Hart robbed stagecoaches. Madame Mustache dealt cards in Nevada. These women operated outside conventional society, carving out spaces where they controlled their own lives. Others found freedom in quieter ways. Homesteading gave women independence. Teaching gave them profession and respect. Writing gave them voice. Women like Laura Ingalls Wilder, Eleanor Pruitt Stewart, and others documented frontier life, preserving stories that would otherwise have been lost. Community building was women's domain. They established schools in tent towns and mining camps, churches, social clubs, quilting bees and barn raisings where isolated families could gather. Women created social fabric in places that had none. They served as midwives, nurses, teachers. They organized charity work. They held communities together through force of will and endless labor. The diversity of women's experiences on the frontier is often overlooked. The dominant narrative focuses on white settlers, but Native American, Hispanic, Black, Chinese, and immigrant women all shaped the West in critical ways. Native American women faced cultural genocide. Their lands were stolen, their people forced onto reservations, their children taken to boarding schools where they were punished for speaking their languages or practicing their religions. But these women also resisted. They maintained cultural traditions. They taught their children in secret. They preserved knowledge that would have been lost. The survival of tribal cultures today is largely due to women who refuse to let them die. Hispanic women, particularly in the Southwest, experienced the transition from Mexican to American rule. Spanish-Mexican property laws had protected their land ownership rights. After annexation, Anglo men married Hispanic women to gain access to land and trade networks. These marriages were strategic for both parties, but they also created cultural blending. Hispanic women maintained their language, their religion, their traditions, influencing the broader culture. Black women migrated west after the Civil War, seeking freedom from Southern oppression. They homesteaded, they established towns, they built communities, but they also faced discrimination. Land claims were challenged. Interracial marriage was banned in many territories. Violence from white settlers was constant. Still, black women persevered, creating spaces of relative safety and opportunity. Chinese women were vastly outnumbered by Chinese men, most of whom worked on railroads or in mines. Some Chinese women were trafficked into sex work. Others ran successful businesses, laundries, restaurants, boarding houses. They faced racism, exclusionary laws like the Chinese Exclusion Act, and violence, but they contributed to frontier economies and cultures in ways often erased from history. Immigrant women from Ireland, Germany, Scandinavia, Italy, and elsewhere brought their cultures to the frontier. They maintained old world traditions while adapting to American life. They formed ethnic communities, spoke their native languages, cooked their traditional foods. They also faced discrimination and poverty, but they survived. They raised children who became fully American while retaining cultural heritage. Widowhood was a common fate and a unique challenge. Men died young on the frontier. Accidents, violence, disease. A widow suddenly found herself running a farm or business alone, caring for children, managing everything her husband had done, plus her own work. Some remarried quickly out of necessity. Others chose independence, proving they could survive and even thrive without a man. One widow told a story that captures the resilience required. Her husband died in winter. She spent 3 months alone with her children, managing livestock, hunting for food, keeping them alive through blizzards. When spring came, she emerged and shocked everyone who'd assumed she was dead. She remarried, eventually, but on her terms, to a man who respected what she'd endured. As the 19th century ended and the 20th began, the frontier was closing. Towns became cities. Railroads connected east and west. Conveniences like running water, electricity, and modern medicine slowly reached even remote areas. Women's roles evolved. Homesteading gave way to more traditional domestic life in many places. Though the freedom women had tasted lingered, the cost of frontier life was immense. Women aged rapidly. Hard work, poor nutrition, repeated pregnancies, and lack of medical care meant a woman of 40 looked 60. Their bodies broke down, joints ached, backs gave out, teeth fell out. Some went blind from years of sewing by candlelight. Others lost fingers to frostbite or machinery. The physical toll was permanent. The emotional cost is harder to quantify. How do you measure the trauma of burying children, of surviving violence, of living in constant fear and exhaustion? Women carried these scars silently. They didn't have therapy or support groups. They had each other, sometimes, and prayer, often, and stoicism, always. They survived by not thinking too hard about what they'd endured, by focusing on today's tasks, by finding small joys: a good harvest, a healthy baby, a kind neighbor. Their legacy is complicated. They helped settle the West, but that settlement came at tremendous cost to native peoples. They built communities and culture, but they also upheld systems of racism and exclusion. They were both victims and participants in American expansion. Their stories deserve to be told in full complexity, honoring their strength while acknowledging the harm done in the name of progress. We romanticize the Old West, cowboys and outlaws and adventure. But for women, it was mostly just hard work and survival. Not glamorous, not particularly noble, just the daily grind of staying alive. The women who lived through it deserve more than romanticism. They deserve acknowledgement of what they endured. They deserve respect for their resilience. They faced horrors that would break most people today. They did it without support systems, without modern medicine, without any of the safety nets we take for granted. And they kept going. So tonight, as you drift off to sleep, think about those women. Think about the 16-year-old bride on her wedding night, terrified and alone. The pregnant woman writing her will because she might not survive childbirth. The widow managing a homestead through winter. The mother burying her third child. The woman cooking dinner with broken hands, or sewing by candlelight, or hauling water in the freezing cold. Think about how privileged we are. We have hospitals and antibiotics and epidurals. We have rights and protections and choices. We have clean water in grocery stores and washing machines. Things that would seem like miracles to frontier women are our everyday reality. And maybe, if you take anything from this story, let it be gratitude. Gratitude for modern medicine that means childbirth doesn't kill us. Gratitude for freedoms that women fought for. Gratitude for the struggles we don't have to face because women before us faced them. If you made it this far and you're still listening, thank you. If you enjoyed this journey through history, I'd appreciate a like and a subscribe, but no pressure. Just, think about it. Now close your eyes, get comfortable, let the weight of history settle into context, not burden. The women we talked about tonight are gone. Their pain is over. Their struggles ended. What remains is the world they helped build. Flawed, yes, but here, existing, because they survived. Sleep well, and tomorrow maybe take a moment to appreciate how much easier your life is than theirs. Not to minimize your struggles, just to gain perspective. Good night.